a lot of private equity institutions don't want that to happen, right? Because they want you to be so financially motivated. And I don't think it's admirable or, or noble to be a starving founder. I think it puts you in a tough spot down the road when an exit is within striking distance, because $20 million may seem like a lot of money when your business and your equity is worth double or triple that. But because you've, been kicking the financial can down the road, you're salivating at the mouth to finally have, your big payday. And I wanted to make sure I got used to some wealth along the way.
All right. I am here with Anne Mahlum, and she is an entrepreneur and investor. How's it going, Anne?
It's good. Steve, how about you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. We were just talking before recording about being in Florida
Mhm.
and all the good that is coming in this summer. But let's talk a little bit about your background before we get into your successes.
Yeah, I mean, we can go as far back as you want, but I've been an entrepreneur since I've been 26 years old. I grew up in North Dakota, had a great childhood there, but when I was a teenager, my dad's addictions kind of screwed up my life plan. I would say. My dad has always struggled with addiction. I knew that as a kid. But I never saw my dad go through it. He went into inpatient recovery for drugs and alcohol before I was 5. So it never really was a part of my upbringing. But when I was 16, gambling had been a part of my dad's life for the last few years. And, as we get older and reflect, that was a big turning point for me, and how my mindset changed and how I viewed life, how I viewed money, how I wasn't going to be a victim of my dad's choices, my parents' divorce. I was really committed to doing like something big with my life as a teenager. Didn't know what that was, but was very determined. And so 10 years later, having had not figured this out yet, and I felt like I looked underneath all the proverbial rocks and just so frustrated and wanted someone to tell me what to do with my life. I was running every day. That was really my coping mechanism since I was a teenager. And it made me feel super invincible and that I was in control of my life moving forward. And I ended up connecting with a group of guys outside of a homeless shelter that was a quarter mile away from my house. And it was as like a light bulb moment that anybody can have. I really felt like, oh my God, I know what I'm supposed to do. It took me 2 years of running by the shelter to figure this out, but I was very drawn to start a running club for the guys that I had gotten to know there. And I, convinced the shelter to let me do it. I had just taken a big job at Comcast, and had 6 weeks off before I was supposed to start, and put all my energy into this running club. And I felt so overwhelmed with purpose and fulfillment. And I was like, this is what I've been asking for, and this is what I'm supposed to do with my life. And it was the first time, Steve, that, as a kid, as 26 years old, where I'm still super young and figuring myself out in the way the world works, that I, against everybody's advice, leaned into what felt right for me. And everybody thought I was crazy to think that I could do this full time and build this thing, and that could have a job or build a nonprofit from a bunch of guys in a homeless shelter, going for a run 3 days a week. But they didn't see what I saw, which was running was just the vehicle, and that we were using running as a tool to help people change the way that they saw themselves, so that we could actually change the direction of their life. And so I did that for 6.5 years. Fortunately, proved everybody else wrong, and proved that these guys were worthy of change and wanting change in their life. And it still operates today in 14 different cities across the country. But I did that for 6.5 years, got the entrepreneurial bug again to go do something else, which, you yourself as an entrepreneur, anybody listening, that's shocking. I think when we find our first thing, it's when it's time to move on and we really feel it, it's unexpected. And I didn't expect to want something else or new, because of how much joy that organization and idea gave me. And frankly, it worked. And you're like, man, what if the next thing doesn't work? All the self-doubts come flooding back. I didn't really know what else I was going to do, but I opened myself up for what that could be. And I went to a Pilates studio in Los Angeles. I was there opening the Back of My Feet chapter, and I was the workout queen. I had done every workout underneath the sun, and I didn't know you could work out like that. I was so amazed on how challenging it was without jumping and pounding. And this was early days. Like Pilates wasn't really a big thing back in 2012, 13. No one really knew about it. And I got obsessed with the workout and realized nobody had built a big brand around this. I know how to scale experiential communities. I'm really passionate about empowering people and women and building community. So I kind of felt like all of my talents and skill sets and frankly interests were wrapped up in this next idea. So I took all my money and opened my first Solidcore studio in November of 2013 in Washington, D.C.
Nice. Very nice. And did you kind of immediately have people that were potential customers because you were already in the studios and everything around the area, I would assume. So did you have like immediate response
Yeah,
from people?
I mean, man, it was the epitome of hustling. There wasn't really like a lot of social media back then. There was Facebook, but Instagram like was barely a thing then. And so I was passing out flyers. I was at
Mm.
like triathlons and races, and I got some media attention because I had some contacts there about opening, this studio. So any possible connection that I thought who would be interested in coming to try out this workout, which was difficult to explain, right? Because it's like, it's not really Pilates, it's Pilates on steroids. It was just so different. And I leaned into that. And our tagline was like, it's the hardest workout you've never tried. So fortunately, had a few hundred people, word got out, come in the first couple of weeks, and their reaction was the same as mine, which was, what was that? And that was amazing. And I have to tell everybody that I know. I also learned that people love to tell people that they worked out that day, and they love to talk about how sore they are. And solid core made you very sore. So that just became our big marketing plan, was just this word of mouth from all of these clients coming. And we were packed. We were packed in the first, month. And it was enough evidence for me. I just didn't feel like it was a fad because I had known for the last year of taking this style of workout, what it does to your body. So I quickly got my second studio open. And then in the first year, I opened 5 locations.
Wow. Okay. So let's go through sort of the story arc of the business. So you got five open in the first year, and going through to the exit itself.
Hmm.
How big did the team get, and how many locations did you kind of scale to before the
Yeah.
exit happened?
Yeah, you kind of can't talk about Solicore's exit without talking about COVID because it happened, right in the middle of our journey.
Mm,
But we grew fast. Fortunately, understood delegation systems, infrastructure, process, like those. It's how my brain is wired. And so we got 25 studios open in the first 4 years, and that's when I took my first institutional round of funding.
mm,
I was tired of opening like 5 a year. I wanted to be like, I want to open 20 or 30 a year. I know that we have a product that is in high demand. I just need more capital. So we raised about 18 million, and I took $6 million off the table during that round, which I always tell founders, a lot of private equity institutions don't want that to happen, right? Because they want you to be so financially motivated. And I don't think it's admirable or, or noble to be a starving founder. I think it puts you in a tough spot down the road when an exit is within striking distance because, $20 million may seem like a lot of money when your business and your equity is worth double or triple that. But because you've, been kicking the financial can down the road, you're salivating at the mouth to finally have, your big payday. And I wanted to make sure I got used to some wealth along the way. So I took money off the table. We raised 18 million. There was a preferred return on that capital. And we opened 50 studios in the next 27 months. So we were like crushing and scaling and growing. And it had always been my plan, Steve, to try to get to 100 studios, and then I was going to sell. Like, I like the startup phase. I like the beginning.
Hmm.
Things get a little monotonous and monolithic at some point where it's just wash, rinse, repeat. The risk is gone, the creativity, the fast pace is gone. And so we were going to do that. And we hired a banker. We were set to get to 100 by end of 2020. So we hired a banker end of February 2020. And then
Hmm.
obviously March rolled around and COVID really messed up our plans. You don't plan, you don't do forecasts for zero revenue coming in, and that's what happened overnight. So we had to pivot. We laid off all of our staff right away. We were the first one in the industry to do it. We got a lot of flack for it, but it had to be done because we didn't know when we were going to be able to operate again. And it was challenging because we were already in 20 states with 20 different sets of rules. You would wake up and be like, did the rules change today? So managing a team of people, we had probably 500 to 750 coaches at this time, part-time coaches. We had, close to 200 full-time people. So it was just like, hey, you guys do this, you guys can't do this. We just followed the local jurisdiction. So that was really challenging. But we also said, you know what, at some point we have to raise money again. So end of 2020, it was becoming obvious to us that the red states were allowing a lot more flexibility with the way we could operate. And so we wanted to take funding to expand our efforts and operations in red states. And so we raised another $50 million in February, like end of January, I guess, 2021. And we got 11 more studios open, by the end of 21 when everybody else was still playing defense and, gradually opening the rest of their, gyms that they had before COVID. And we were in major expansion mode. So the business recovered fully by 2022. And so the opportunity, I was ready. I had promoted a CEO in May of 2021. I was executive chair. There was this, transition. I was comfortable turning over the reins. Brian, who's still the CEO, is who I promoted. He was doing a great job. So everything was just working, without me as it was my job as the founder to ensure that. So 2023 rolled around and our minority partners, I still had control of the company, didn't want to sell. And because I had control of the company, I was like, I'm ready. I want to sell. And they were like, well, Anne, how about, we buy some of your shares, bring in another partner, we'll step in, be majority, and we can buy you out if you're ready to be out. So that's what happened. And I sold, all of my equity in April of 23.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. The COVID sort of black swan event, I've talked to so many people about how they adjusted through it. And it is like such an interesting move to pick the states that you're
Mhm.
gonna like accelerate in, basically, that have the door semi open during that period, and just going for it, raising 50 and then going and opening up more studios
Yeah.
is fun to hear. I'm glad that a lot of people were just freaked out trying to slow down, and you sort of took advantage and accelerated, which
Yeah.
is admirable. I like that. I like that. So when it came to the whole process, it was like a
Mhm.
buyout from the minority shareholders. You'd promoted the CEO, Brian, I believe you said his name was. He's
Mhm.
still there. How did it work out? Was it like a vesting period where you had to stick around for a little while, or
Mhm.
it was just clean cut out the
Yeah,
door?
it was, first off, I would tell people the deals that I did, I would never advise anybody to do. I was like a nut job. Sometimes, Steve, I literally look back and when I told you we opened 50 studios, 50 corporately owned stores in 27 months, I'm like, how did we do that? Like sometimes I'm just like, I don't even understand how we accelerated so fast so quickly. And when you're taking institutional capital with preferred return on it, if you're not growing at accelerated rate, listen, a preferred return, I'm not sure the education of your listeners, some of you probably know what that means, but for those of you who don't, it means that, the preferred return for me, the last round I took was a 3x preferred capital. So $50 million, that meant that private equity partner was going to see 150 million before I saw another dime.
Hmm.
And again, that's a risky position for a founder to be in. But I just knew, again, our ability to execute. And because I was in control of when we were going to sell, that number didn't feel so scary. There was no pressure from anybody else. But I also sold when the business was doing extremely well and I succession planned. So when they were interviewing, we had term sheets from additional partners who were interested in Solidcore in March of 23 when we were in this process. I wasn't a part of those meetings on purpose, right? Because if I go into the leadership meetings where we're meeting with private equity and I'm talking all the time, they're going to be convinced that this company doesn't work without Anne, that she's still running the show.
Mhm.
So I didn't go to those. My CEO, my CFO, my VP of legal, the team went and presented and did a really great job. So there was no concern for the new PE partners that Solidcore wasn't going to work without Anne Mahlum. We had already been operating that way for 2 years.
Mhm.
And because the company was doing so well, you mentioned at the beginning of the show, don't share anything you're not comfortable with. I talk ad nauseum about this stuff and I share all the details because so many times, people can't or they're afraid because they sign NDAs. And I think that's where founders and entrepreneurs end up signing bad deals because more people like me need to share the deals that we did. So I was able to, because the business was doing so well and I controlled the company, was able to negotiate the private equity firm to pay all my state taxes. I was like
Mhm.
an S corp within an LLC. So there's, whenever you have a transaction, you have to pay pro rata. And it was like, listen, I'm not using X amount of my exit dollars to pay these taxes. Like, if you want this deal done, you guys are going to have to agree to pay the taxes. And then my number was always 100 million. I was not going to sell my shares for less than that. And that included my first round and second round of money I took off the table.
Mhm.
So the third round, I was 10 million bucks short. And I'm like, the only way this works is if you guys figure out a way to get me another 10 million. So I got all of my 90-ish million when I sold, and we agreed that when the company sold again, as long as the PE firm met a minimum threshold, which was super achievable, that there would be a kicker of, an additional $10 million, which happened in September of 2024.
Got it. So it sold again.
Yeah, I sold again.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
And for people listening, in terms of the preparedness, I like that you created the succession plan. A lot of people have talked about that,
Hmm.
or some people that are into sports call it bench depth. Like you have
Yeah.
the ability to replace yourself. And I like that you mentioned that because I think when we talk about how to prepare, that's probably something a lot of people don't think about is like how to just remove yourself completely
Yep.
and step back. And this was a really cool example of basically making it set up so that you could step back, have a clean cut
Yeah.
deal. They pay your taxes. I think that's awesome. That's a great negotiation piece that I haven't heard anybody actually do. I think
Yeah.
that's really cool. So when it comes to timing, you mentioned it previously. You mentioned that you're a 0 to 1 person, similarly to me. A lot of people on the show are 0 to 1, where they want to build. They
Hmm.
don't want to kind of run the operations day to day as it gets completely constructed. What would you say around timing for people that are listening? Why would it be the right time, and why was it the right time for you?
Well, two things on timing, I guess. One, my 100 studios, right? That was what I always, for me, wanted to get to. I wanted to be a part of a company that I helped take to 100 studios, and I
Mhm.
wanted the $100 million payout. So I
Yeah.
wasn't going to sell until I knew, my equity was around that amount and felt like I could negotiate that for me. So I had that end game in mind for a very long time. And I think having that specific goal and working backward makes the deadline or the time to sell really easy because Steve, you can always stay around for more. And I
Mhm.
think if you don't have a clear end goal, you're always going to want more. You can always stay longer. And I, as a human, felt like I've done enough work to know what's important to me. And that was going to be enough money. Like everybody thinks like, and if you just would have stayed, I'm like, yeah, I would have made more money. But I am somebody who believes in chapters and growth. And if I didn't move on from Solidcore, that would have delayed my next chapter by almost, 2 years. And that was more valuable to me than another 30, 40, $50 million. I know that might sound crazy to some people, but I also didn't know Solidcore was going to sell for more, down the road. You have no idea on the timing of some of these things. So you need to just feel really great and know that there isn't going to be regret in the future about what you said you were out to do. So
Mhm.
with that end game always in mind, I just worked backwards. I knew I had to promote Brian. I had to get somebody else in the CEO role. And if I didn't, I knew I was going to get stuck. I was going to be working for private equity, doing an earnout. The private equity partner was going to own my company. They were going to try to, when it came time to calculate an earnout, make sure I got as little as possible. And I just thought that that tension with my company, I didn't want that. I didn't want to feel gross and icky. I wanted there to be an amazing last day, which I had. And that was really, really important to me.
Mhm.
So all the decisions that I made, it was like, this is the North Star. And if the decision wasn't in support of that North Star, I didn't make it. So I was as deliberate as I think I possibly could be. And see, that doesn't mean it was easy, like not being in those leadership meetings, knowing that you know, you have to check your ego. Cause I'm like, all the decisions that I made to get us there, you want to brag about it. You want people to know you did this thing and this thing. And I made my own machines. I went through 2 lawsuits. There's so many decisions that got made in the early part of that business. And I'm like, my lawyer who gave me really good advice when I was like, I don't know, probably complaining about that, letting my ego have a moment. He's like, Anne, that's what the money's for. And you need to be okay with that. And I'm like, you're right. Like I have to let the company move on and thrive and grow. And that's like why I did all of this. So when
Mhm.
I feel like I want to be like, yeah, but I'm the one who built it. It's like, just move on, let it go. Everybody knows you're the founder.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think there's so many things to that statement to unpack with like that's what the money's for
Yeah.
is basically like just kind of have a great last day and walk away. I think something that comes up pretty frequently with deals like this, not only around the preparedness, and sounds like you had a great attorney. Attorneys come up a
Yes.
lot.
Yes.
And I hear sometimes horror stories about about attorneys that were you know, practicing some other kind of law and then doing
Yep.
deals that turns out a little bit of a disaster. But I'm glad that you had a good attorney. When it came to the valuation, you had that 100 number in your mind
Mm-hmm.
already, but was there anything that you could share with listeners around how to kind of have a really solid stance when it comes to valuation and how to negotiate those
Mm-hmm.
types of terms when you're doing a
Yeah.
deal?
Like it all depends on the type of sector in the business. My experience is brick and mortar and fitness, and those multiples usually paid between 10 and 15 of your corporate EBITDA. Now,
Mhm.
when you're younger in the beginning stages, again, depending on the preferred return or if you're doing a minority deal or majority deal, some of those things are negotiable. And frankly, when the business is killing it, like I mentioned with the taxes and the extra 10 million, everything becomes negotiable because you're negotiating from a place of strength and from a very powerful, profitable business that everybody believes in its future. So again, it's like the timing of selling your company. If the company's doing really, really great, ask for more. Like uh, one of my someone was interviewing or talking to one of my a partner that I wasn't that close to at one of the private equity shops, and he told this person that was like, oh yeah, Anne can be difficult. And I'm like, that's a badge of honor from that private equity shop because they're the ones who paid my taxes and I got an extra $10 million. And they're not used to an entrepreneur pushing and asking because, like I mentioned in the earlier part of this podcast, Steve, I think that most entrepreneurs sell themselves short and they haven't taken money off the table. So, again, when the big $20 million exit is standing in front of them, that feels like more money than you know what to do with, even though the value of what you have built and of the business may be worth a lot more than that. But
Mhm.
again, you're desperate for your exit and you don't want to be greedy or whatever that, stuff is. So always negotiate from a place of strength. And you used a sports reference. I love basketball. I'm so sad about the Knicks. But like I always felt that way about going out. Like I wanted to go out on top. I didn't want to go out when the company was struggling. I didn't want to overstay my welcome. I wanted to go out on a year where we were killing and crushing and I made a ton of money. And then of course, you may or may not know, but I had an LTIP in place for my employees, not of my own personal equity pool, like shared millions with my employees because they're the ones who also helped create the value for the business.
Mhm.
And one of the things I'm most proud of is L Catterton, who's a big private equity shop, and they now own Solidcore. They have kept that LTIP in place for the employees because the employees demanded it. They're like, we are not going to let all of this wealth just go to the top. Wealth does not have to be a zero-sum game. There's like, I don't know, 3,000 plus people who work there now who make that thing run and operate, and they contribute to the overall profitability and success of that business, and they should share in that financially as well.
Right on. I love that. Love that.
Yeah.
I think that the team is crucial. Team is
Mhm.
crucial. So you said it was 3,000 now. What was the size when the deal went through?
The deal, we had over, like, I think it was 1,100 to 1,200 employees.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. So that takes us to the finale. Knowing what you know now,
Mhm.
what would you tell Ann 10 years ago?
I think I would tell Anne to y- to trust herself. Like, I never talked to myself small, Steve, like even back then. And, looking back now, it's like, yeah, because when we talk to ourselves and we tell ourselves to play small or we don't think big things are possible for us, the only way that I had the exit that I had was I never let anybody push me around. I never let anybody tell me what I couldn't do, and frankly, every single person, right? When I'm growing, you're growing too fast. Gyms have a high failure rate. Like it comes at you at all angles. And I feel like I was a little bit like Teflon. I just didn't allow anybody's voice or doubts or limitation on their own expectations of themselves permeate what my possibility for me is. So I think I would probably tell her right on.
Well said. Well, what are you working on now and where can people learn more?
Yeah, I do a good amount of advising. I do one-on-one advising where people can book calls with me, to help them with their business. I enjoy that, mainly in the fitness and wellness and brick and mortar space. I do a lot of public speaking, which I also love. My whole sort of personal brand is about empowerment and teaching people how to play a game that they can win and live a big life. And I do some investing in startups. Again, pretty much stay in the health and wellness, space and that playground, just because I love being involved with incredible founders who are trying to make people's lives happier and healthier. And I play a lot of beach volleyball. So that's mainly how I spend my time. And people can
Nice.
find me. There's so many social channels, but I'm pretty active on Instagram, and the other ones is like hit or miss. It's just too much to keep up with.
Cool. And is it just at
Yeah,
and
Anne Mahlum.
okay.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, everybody that's listening on iTunes or Spotify, the links that Ann mentioned will be in the show notes. But thank you so much for coming on, Ann.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.